Thank you. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Welcome. Thanks, Angelique. Welcome to a very interesting topic, one that affects us quite a bit as we involve ourselves in the development and the implementation of skills development and all its different components. My name is Jonathan Brauns, and I will be taking you through the presentation. We'll try and keep it as brief as possible within the time constraints so that we can allow for some interaction as well. Okay, so we're looking
Jonathan, if I can just chip in for a moment. Hi, everyone. Also, just remember the way to handle things today. If you have any comments, please put them into the chat box, as Angelique is suggesting now, and then I will moderate them for Jonathan and bring them to him as soon as there's an appropriate time. So, but please do interact. That's the point of this, is it's a conversation, not just a presentation. Jonathan, back to you.
Thanks, Andy. Okay, so let's get right into it then. We're talking about the responsibilities of each role player, and I think you know, one thing worth noting is that there does seem to be confusion at times as to who is responsible exactly for what. And we find ourselves in situations where at the end of a learnership, and I mean, I think some of us have experienced that, where it's not possible to exit the learners, it's not possible to upload their achievements, statements of results can't be issued because someone failed to register the learnerships in the first place. So let's look at these roles. I think we,
Jonathan, you're not screen sharing
to a large
yet.
extent, is it on now?
Yes, we're on. Go for it.
Okay, apologies for that. Right, so the responsibilities cut across all the different elements of implementation, and most of these, if you've been involved, whether you're an SDP or an SDF responsible for arranging the training, you would be familiar with all of these different components of implementing a qualification. We all know now that there are a few things that are different from what we've been accustomed to over the years with the unit standard-based qualifications. So the occupational qualifications have got a few pertinent differences or unique features that we'd like to focus on. The first one being the training component, which we know as very, very clear a component. There's three components of the knowledge, the practical, and the workplace, with a strong focus on the workplace. And it's to a large extent within the context of that workplace focus that we're going to be looking at the responsibilities of the different role players. Then there's the quality assurance component, which now has the element of a whole string of assessments that need to take place across all of these three different components of the occupational qualification. So we're going to look at that, because that becomes the building blocks and a strong dependency for preparing learners for the third component, which is the ISA, the external integrated summative assessment, which is now an entirely new element that never existed with our previous qualifications. So who are the role players that we're talking about? You know, colleagues, as you know, we could speak forever about the different role players, all of the roles that they need to play. But today we will just focus on some of the critical players here. So the first one is the skills development provider. Now, if you are responsible for organizing this training and for the successful execution or implementation of it, what do you expect the SDP to be performing? Okay, so another shopping list of things that they need to do, which we will be, I'm sure everybody is familiar with, but we've highlighted a few of the ones that we'd like to touch on today. And remember, we're talking particularly in relation to those 3 components that are new in the occupational qualifications. So firstly, we're looking at ensuring that the workplace is in place, that the learners will get the necessary workplace exposure because of the workplace focus of an occupational qualifications. Just worth mentioning that so critical is the workplace component that the regulations that we placed, the learnership regulations, are even called, and Doc also discussed those with us the other week, the workplace-based learning program agreement regulations. That is how critical the workplace component is. And so the provider needs to ensure that the learners will get the relevant and appropriate exposure at the workplace, that the evaluation of that workplace will ensure that the workplace meets the requirements, and that the workplace gives the learners the opportunity to meet the qualification requirements. And so the SDP needs to do some capacitation of the employer. And then there is the mentor whom the employer will appoint, who also needs to be capacitated, because that's the person who we'll discuss in a moment as well when we talk about the employer, to basically be there for the learner and ensure that they complete the logbook, they do all their assignments, complete the logbook, submit, and then the mentor then needs to evaluate that logbook. So there are certain skills and competencies that the mentor needs to have, bearing in mind that the mentor is an employee at the employer. It's most likely the supervisor in a department where the learners will be based, whether the learners are employed or unemployed learners. But the mentor is a supervisor slash manager, and they will be overseeing the performance of this learner in the workplace, the supervision of this person in their normal execution of their duties, but the added responsibility of making sure that they complete the logbook, that they do the assignments necessary for the workplace learning, and that they then evaluate those assignments. And so the provider needs to capacitate this mentor. The challenge is that if the mentor doesn't perform their role properly, then the learning could fall flat. And this is a very, very critical thing for the SDF or the project manager responsible for this project to be aware of. And so not only is the focus then on the fact that the SDP needs to be accredited, which is, taken as a given. We don't even debate that one. But this role of the SDP in supporting the workplace by capacitating the mentor, as well as the skills development people at the workplace, at the employer, to ensure that they know what needs to be done. And so there's a very, very, very important role that the SDP plays in relation to that workplace.
Just a question, Jonathan. So if you were to summarize, I mean, we're accustomed to working with logbooks already with our legacy qualifications and with a mentor there. How is this role different? What is the difference in the role?
Look, the difference now is that what happens with the logbook, the requirements of the qualification are written into the learner's logbook, together with and this is where there's a difference from what happened in the past, is that the duties, the performance, the KPIs of the learner in the workplace, together with the outcomes of the qualification, are all included in the logbook. And so this mentor, in addition to managing this person's performance and appraising their performance from an employer perspective, they also need to manage the performance of the learner in relation to the qualification requirements in that logbook. And they then need to assess the completed logbook. They need to evaluate the completed logbook, you know, on using the appropriate rubric and so on. So there is an additional set of skills that's required of the mentor. The mentor also needs to be familiar with the content of what the learner is learning. And so there's a much deeper involvement by the mentor in the learning journey. As a matter of fact, the mentor is one way or another also part of the learning journey. And you know, so the mentor becomes an integral part of the learning, as opposed to merely having a learner in the workplace that they just need to keep an eye on, and at the end have to you know, ensure that they've completed the logbook and that it's submitted. There's a much deeper involvement. In fact, this workplace mentor doubles up as an extension of the training delivery itself. And so that's how critical and how much of an integral part of the learning the mentor has become with an occupational qualification. I can tell you that the entire learning experience will be completely weakened if the mentor's role is not performed properly. And there is a dependence on the SDP to ensure that that happens. So
Jonathan,
that's why.
Then a question from Nsako. With the capacitation of the workplace mentors and supervisors, does it matter if we give them a half-day accredited training on mentorship and coaching, or even if it's a basic soft skills intervention? Do you have any comment on that?
Yeah, I think that would go a long way, Andy. In fact, I would say as part of the initial induction process, there needs to be some kind of a session, not only with the mentor, but remember the HR people, the skills people responsible for this project at the employer. There are also roles that they need to play. And those roles cut across what the learner needs to do, the requirements of the CETA if there's a grant funding involved. Then there's the registration process of the learnership agreements, you know, all of those things. And then there's going to come the submissions of the required documentation and stuff to the QCTO. There's the ISA piece that still needs to happen, and the employer needs to be part of that. So it would be very useful if, as part of the induction and maybe even part of the contracting process, that there be a half-day workshop for whatever duration, a full briefing that creates an awareness of what the employer is getting themselves into when they are registering learners onto an occupational qualification and opening their doors for that process. The workplace is the most critical part, and the SDP has a vital role to play in ensuring that that workplace does justice to the learning to the learning experience. So then, of course, with those formative and summative assessments, so the SDP obviously does the training. They do the assessment, the normal stuff that we're all familiar with. And then comes the point where, when the learner has achieved and met the requirements of the knowledge and the practical and the workplace components of this qualification, the SDP needs to issue a statement of results, which is the key to open the door to the final, the external integrated summative assessment for the learner. So again, therein lies an extremely critical role for the SDP to play. And I must say, not only for the facilitators, the assessors, the moderators. But for the admin people at the SDP, attention to detail is critical, and a full understanding of all of the requirements. The requirements of the QCTO, the assessment center, and of course, you know, the expectations of the employer. So there is no, there's absolutely no overemphasizing of the role, the critical nature of the role that the SDP plays in the implementation of an occupational qualification. And sorry, this thing is very sensitive here. Let me just do that. Yes. So so I think it's important that we understand what those responsibilities are, and they revolve around these things.
So now there are two more questions from Kerry. Am I correct in understanding that for occupational qualifications, the assessor and moderator do not have to be accredited as a constituent assessor or moderator of the QCTO? Who will advise who the AQP will be for the QCTO accredited occupational qualifications? Will there be a list of accredited assessment centers for the ISA? Will the external assessment centers charge the SDP for their learners to sit for the ISA at their venue? So there's a bunch of questions there from Kerry. And there's also one from John. Do you want to respond to Kerry first?
Yeah, just give me the first one again, Andy.
So am I correct in understanding that for occupational qualifications, the assessor moderator do not have to be accredited as a constituent assessor with QCTO?
You know, I've heard that conversation, Andy, and I think it's worth exploring and finding out more. What I have discovered is you ask a question like that. For example, I asked a question, who issues the actual certificate? Is it the CETA or is it the QCTO? Then you know, the answer I get is a clear QCTO. Then I ask, who uploads the achievements onto the NLRD? Is it the CETA or is it the QCTO? And I get differing answers to that question. So what I'm finding is that the occupation qualification, the entire system is still work in progress, and there are still some areas. So this is one specific question that we need to clarify, because I've also heard conversation around it and a bit of confusion around it, whether the assessor and the moderator need to be constituent assessors and moderators for the qualification. So maybe let's make a note of it and try and get some clarity from you know, the QCTO themselves, and then see if we can get back with an answer to that one. What's the next one, Andy?
And then Kerry also asked, who will advise who the AQP will be for the QCTO qualifications? Will there be a list of accredited assessment centers?
Okay.
And will the assessment centers charge for the ISA?
Right. The AQP, the assessment quality partner, the best placed entity to ask is the CETA, because now in the system, the CETA is the assessment quality partner to the CETA, right? So if you're talking about, and then the assessment center themselves form part of that AQP fraternity. Now, there's also a bit of haziness as to whether the assessment center themselves are considered to be an AQP, or is it the CETA that is the AQ, that is the partner to the QCTO. But as to who the AQP will be, the CETA is the one that will determine, and it's generally going to be the CETA through which that qualification is registered with the QCTO, right? The assessment centers will definitely charge for their services, and I've heard going rates floating between anywhere from 2,000 to 4,000. I think Doc also touched on that during his one presentation. But The fee is dependent obviously on the qualification and the nature of the exam and the service, but the funded projects, some of the SETAs are still working on their funding models. They haven't worked them out yet as to how much are they going to charge for a qualification which now includes the cost of the ISA exam. And bear in mind as well that the SDP, if you look on the 1 point here, prepare the learners for the ISA, there is a cost involved in doing that, which was not part of the delivery of a training program previously. Now learners have to do mock exams. You probably have to do a refresher course, because remember that if they write the exam, when they write the exam, it's probably a year after they started the initial module, or a good couple of months later. So they'll need a refresher. At whose cost? So all of that needs to be taken into account in the costing model that the funding SETA will pay, but the assessment center definitely charging for the services.
So Jonathan, then there's still a question from John, which we must come back to, but Charlene has got a comment. In my experience, for qualifications already implemented through QCTO, assessors and moderators must be trained through ETDP SETA and have a statement of results. They do not have to be registered with the SETA, but their CV must show very clearly that they are subject matter experts in the qualification. And then the question from John, what about the SDF? Surely they also need to play a key role in ensuring the employer is set up to deliver the workplace component.
Yes, look, the SDF, the SDF, and it depends. I mean, if we're talking about an SDF who sits inside the company, then, you know, if their role, if their responsibility is that they're going to act as the project manager for this lot, and they're going to be responsible for, you know, the project from start to finish, then they'll have to included in their responsibilities will be to ensure that the employer and the workplace meet the requirements, definitely. And I mean, even if it's an independent consultant kind of SDF, and they've been entrusted with the task of implementing this project, then I think the same thing would apply. Whoever is responsible for project managing this project will be responsible for ensuring that all the components are in place. I mean, you know, by the nature of the role of a project manager anyway.
Jonathan, then just a last thing, we've got 8 minutes left. So
sure.
You may want to move.
Okay. Then I'm just going to fly. I think we've also already touched on some of the other topics that I would have covered. The employer, we've already been speaking about the employer. And the important thing to note here is that the employer needs to very carefully identify this mentor in the context of what we've been discussing earlier. And then all of those roles which we are all familiar with, nothing new, similar to what's been happening with training, as you know, as we've known it up to now. But the very critical component of that workplace mentor is the one that we need to focus on. The other thing, of course, in any training project, that it would be the careful selection of the learners, and then the contracting of those unemployed learners. That's a critical part of the employer's role over there. Then we've got the SETA, and the SETA, you know, to a large extent, the role SETAs played previously has been taken over by the QCTO. They've now been, it's been delegated to them that they play the development quality partner role. At the moment, there were 3 hats. They're a DQP for developing qualifications. Then they are a quality assurance partner for the legacy qualifications. And then they are also the assessment quality partner. And so they get involved in some kind of coordination monitoring role with accreditation of SDPs and assessment centers. And then they also get involved in the coordination of the ISA registrations of learners and stuff like that. But the SETA, by their mandate from the Skills Development Act, the SETA facilitates skills development in the sector. And here you can see, to a large extent, the SETA plays a facilitation role. And then, of course, they are the ones that disperse the grants, the levy grants. And then we look at the QCTO. Well, when it comes to the QCTO, they're the overarching authority. They are responsible for the occupational qualification sub-framework, its development and its maintenance. The accreditation sits with them now of SDPs and the assessment centers. The learner certification will sit with them. The certification of the legacy qualification still sits with the SETAs. And then, of course, they do research and focus on ongoing improvements and so on. And then we've got finally the assessment center. And then with the assessment center, there is the normal, and this is focused on the exam. This is a component that we never had before. I think a lot of people are still grappling to understand how this is going to work. There will definitely be a fee for the exam, and better you ensure, if it's a funded project, that the funding includes the cost of the assessment center. But the assessment center will give you all the detail. If you are the SDF responsible for coordinating and managing this project, all the information about the steps to be followed, the templates to be completed, there are packs that must be submitted to this assessment center when the learners are ready to write the exam. They're the ones that are going to give all the guidance. Of importance to note here is that some SETAs are still in the process of working with their sectors to get entities to register as assessment centers. And so I think it's still a work in progress, but they're at the tail end, and this is where the certifications then depend on the learners doing that final external integrated summative assessment. The assessment center will mark the scripts. They will provide the questionnaires, the question papers for the mock exams, which will generally be question papers from a previous exam, if it's not the first time. If it's a first time, they'll probably develop your question papers for the mock exams to prepare the learners. And then they'll distribute the actual question papers, do the marking, do the moderation. And once they're done with their moderation, there's certification committees and stuff and processes, and then they submit the results to the QCTO. Between the QCTO and the SETA, one of those entities will then upload the achievements onto the NLRD. So that's that. And of course, as we know, all of this is done with the learner as the central core focus. And yeah, better we understand what are these responsibilities of the different role players, who is supposed to do what, and so that in the end, we don't sit with the projects like with the problems that we've had, where we've had learners completing, and at the end of the project, there is a question about, listen, where are those portfolios, or how are we going to upload these learner results when the agreements were never registered with the SETA, and those kind of complications that set in. So I think it's very important that we understand the roles, that the relevant role players perform those roles and responsibilities, and that we have our projects being closed off successfully in the end. Thank you very much. I don't know whether there's time for a question or two, Andy.
Jonathan, several comments from people asking, can a recording be made available? John is saying, can we get the slides? Wilma is saying, this conversation is very deep. Is it possible we can dedicate more time in future to continue this specific topic? John is agreeing with that. So is Anthea. More time is needed for this topic. Very interesting. So I think we will come back to it. We'll look for further sessions where we can talk more about delivery of these qualifications. You'll also see in the side chat box there's a place now to click on the link to get your CPD points, so please make use of that. Are there any final questions for Jonathan before we close? If you can please type them in.
Let me just add, Andy, that I agree with the feeling that more time is needed. As a matter of fact, I think there's a lot more clarity needed from the powers that be, from the relevant authorities. There's also a need to unpack each role player in a session on its own, so that there's adequate time to get deeper into the the technicalities of each role player's responsibilities. So I think that it's a good call, and perhaps we should plan around that.
So there's two more comments in there from Kerry. She wants your email address, please, Jonathan, if you're willing to share that. And John Arneson says there are 35 people in the conversation. It took years to get the old system working. We need time and capacitation workshops urgently. So ASDSA will take that away. We can do some stuff around that may help.
Sure.
Jonathan?
Angelique, please, would you help? Just type my email address into the chat.
Will do.
Thanks.
Anything else for Jonathan from anyone today? Jonathan, one comment from John Anderson. Thank you, brilliant. Jonathan, I think we're done.
Thank you so much. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Andy. Thanks, Angelique.
Thanks, everyone.